friends, and welcome to the Co-Regulated Canines podcast. I'm Ashley Cipoletti, your host, and I'm on a mission to create more connection. Dogs are really just the starting point. Together, we'll explore how to live with more harmony, ease, and healing so we can show up more as the best version of ourselves, not just for our dogs, but also for our community and our planet too. So grab a coffee and let's dive in. Hello, friends, and welcome. Thank you for being here with me today. And I want to first start off with acknowledging that I went a little MIA. Past couple weeks, I was traveling, I got sick, and then I just was really repulsed or repelled by social media. Anytime I went on it, I was like, oh, I felt like I had new eyes to see it after I had just a couple weeks of a lot of fun and connection. And I just felt like I was in the real world with friends and community. And then going from that to back in our normal routine and just seeing like post after post or reel after reel of everyone selling themselves and trying to be relevant and get attention. It just kind of, again, really repelled me from it, where I was like, I need to take a break from this and come back to it when it feels aligned and when I feel like I want to. And with that as well, it was hard to record any podcasts when I lost my voice. So here we are, we're back. My voice is still a little scratchy. But I wanted to also share some cool insights I got from this break. So I gave myself permission to take a pause. I felt a little bit of that anxiety of produce, get back in there and, that grind that I think we can feel, especially in today's day and age. But I just felt like my body was no, you need rest. And I felt like I was being called to just really nurture myself. And within that phase of taking that pause, I slowed down and I started to kind of uncover some almost deeper and unconscious grief and feelings that had been living in my body that I wasn't even aware of. And I feel like creating that space for myself when I didn't even know why allowed those feelings to come up, which I could fully feel and process and then feel lighter after, which was really cool. And sometimes it was really heavy and it came in waves. But it was interesting and I think a much needed experience for myself to come back as my best self and get ready to feel more creative. And I feel like grief is sneaky like that, kind of waits until we're quiet enough to feel it. And when it surfaces, it doesn't always make sense. It doesn't always come with language or logic, but we often need that space. We need to soften. And I think if we're go, or always filling space with whether that's podcasts or songs or TV shows or social media or going out, or maybe it's food and drinking, who knows? I just feel like we don't give ourselves a lot of space. And I think grief especially really surfaces when we give the space. And I think welcoming it feels scary, but I feel like allowing it to come in, honestly, feels lighter than just pushing it to the side. And yeah, that was kind of my experience. Wanted to share why I was MIA and curious if any of you have ever taken that time to just take a pause, create some space, and if unconscious feelings or grief has ever come up when you've done that and what that experience was like. Okay, so moving on. While I was taking this little break, I started reading this book called The Myth of Normal by Gabor Mate. I'm probably totally butchering how you pronounce his name. So sorry. He is amazing. For anyone who hasn't heard of his work, highly, highly recommend. He often talks about really the depth of epigenetics. So that's kind of the history of your parents, your grandparents, all of their stressors, experiences, thoughts, feelings, beliefs being passed down and influencing potentially your DNA or what behaviors or attributes might be exacerbated in certain environments. And if it's you grow up in the same conditions and environment, it's likely that those behaviors, attributes, and even illnesses come up. It's a really interesting concept. And it's actually something that happens in all species. And I started to just look through this book with an kind of like a lens of how do we apply this to dogs? Because a lot of it, I couldn't help but see these parallels. I was like, this is just on par. And so much of what he was talking about was kind of like what we call like the critical socialization period in dogs, or socialization in general. So I thought that would be a beautiful topic for today, of really breaking down what we mean by socialization and then helping you kind of connect these parallels to better understand yourself. If you have kids, also understanding that, and then understanding how this shows up in dogs as well. So, socialization, I feel like, is misunderstood. A lot of people think, oh, my dog just needs to be socialized. I have to throw him in a dog park, or, I don't know, take him to doggy daycare and expose him to all these dogs so he's well socialized. Or they think it means exposing a puppy to everyone and everything. And that's not fully accurate. So, socialization is referred to as this process, really like when dogs have kind of this neuroplasticity in their brain, meaning they're most susceptible to learning and experiences to shape their beliefs and kind of feelings about the world around them, and how they relate to others and the environment that they're in. And so some of this already is passed down from the moment they were in utero and born through that epigenetics piece we just talked about. And then some attributes can be like activated or not activated depending on the environment. And so if we get a dog and we're wanting them to adapt to our human world, we need to think about how do we not only just expose them to the things they'll be surrounded by as an adult dog, but also how do we help shape their beliefs to be a little more optimistic, instead of looking at anything new as something that's a potential threat. It's how do we help them understand that things that are new, they could look at with curiosity. And it's kind of like like socialization is emotional learning as well, and almost like nervous system imprinting. So, in most of today's day and age, or at least in the United States, we are pretty safe. We want, like, our dogs are pretty safe. Like, actually, they're not really needing to defend themselves or protect themselves from much in their environment. So because of that, if dogs are more prone to that hypervigilance and defensiveness, it can cause problems in our society, right? Of, oh, that dog, maybe people will label as aggressive, or dogs will be barking and people will get evicted from apartments, or people can struggle with having guests over, or even with dating because their dog is like growling at anyone in the home, or having these defensive behaviors where it might not actually be appropriate for the situation. Like, actually, we know we're safe, but your dog's perception of what is going on is that they are unsafe. So in contrast, if your dog was, grew up on the streets and was going to be living in the streets, they need to have that street smarts of understanding what is a threat and what is not. So they might be more keen on understanding, like, keep away from cars. Depending on the country that they live in, maybe people can provide food and shelter, or maybe people provide harm or cause harm, and they need to stay away from. So those early experiences, and especially, again, if the dog was growing up in the environment that its parents were in, it would help them adapt to that environment through that kind of epigenetic learning of what is safe or unsafe, or should they look at things as opportunities for more survival. And then something kind of funky happens because we often take these dogs and rescue them and put them in new environments. And then all those traits that a dog or puppy could have learned or been passed down from its parents to keep itself safe now become problematic in our human world, because, like I said earlier, it's like, all right, if your dog is barking at everything or perceiving everything as a threat, which would have kept it safe in a different environment, now it's actually influencing the likelihood of that dog being rehomed or euthanized, or causing a lot of harm to the human owner as well, because they're not able to live their own life or meet their needs. So I think that's an important concept to tie back into when we think of socialization. It's really like nature is doing its course of being like, okay, if the baby is growing up in an environment that the mother and grandmother and father and grandfather were living in, we need to be adapted to it for survival. But then again, in our human worlds, when we're just adopting and rescuing and moving dogs around, we're kind of messing with nature a bit, and we have our own societal conditions and norms that dogs didn't agree to or sign up for. But on the contrast, if a dog has a lineage of being like, or living in close proximity to people, and or maybe they're a working breed dog, or they just were good pet dogs and companions, that's going to be passed down to their young of like, okay, you are more likely to adapt pretty well to this environment instead of having more of that likelihood of being defensive or reactive or acting over the top in these circumstances. Because a lot of times back in the day, this is pretty harsh, but back in the day, people used to literally shoot those dogs that would have those behaviors. So it kind of like wiped a lot of that out. And again, understanding history is important because that was the case for a lot of like quote unquote purebred dogs. But now again, we have what's called like backyard breeders or things like that, where some of them might be doing a decent job and some of them might be creating a lot of stress for the mother and for the babies because they don't have their needs met. They're not exposed to anything. They're just isolated in a crate to profit off of because people want a dog of a certain color with certain eyes that looks a certain way. They can make a crap ton of money by essentially like having these dogs breed as if they were like in a factory, like a shoe factory. And these dogs won't be well equipped for really any kind of life since all they knew was this tiny stressed out little crate scenario. So that is one, I feel like, funnel that a lot of dogs are coming into our society with as a background. And then another is dogs that were rescued from other countries or other environments. And then we also have dogs that were coming in from, I think, responsible breeding practices. But depending on the breed, some of these dogs might be more prone to behaviors that do not align with apartment living or city living, which unfortunately most of us are doing now because human population is going up. There's more urbanization everywhere. So dogs that were, originally, used to, let's say, like support, I don't know, hunting, or they're herding dogs. They had all this land to run and express a lot of these behaviors. And now they're put in tiny apartments and in cities. So now we're having a lot of these behavior issues from genetics, even from responsibly bred lineages. It's like, just the environment is not really suitable for some of the traits that dog might have. And so again, thinking of socialization in this way, we can help our dogs, even if they came to us with a lot of quote unquote baggage. I don't like that word, but you know what I mean. Or if they came to us with a lot of potential, we can support them through things they might struggle with of like, okay, we're going to need you to adapt to this urban world. Let's start pairing movement like of skateboards or cars or children screaming with positive experiences and from distances that the puppy can handle. So we don't want them to feel overwhelmed and like they need to run away and defend themselves. It's like we want them to be from a distance that they are alerted to the thing and can process it. And maybe they just process it and don't have treats, or maybe they're able to take food and we can give them some treats or play with them. So it's this like exposure of what they'll be around from a distance that they can handle. And we need to tweak that distance depending on the individual. Again, if they're showing signs of distress, of running away or growling or whatever, that tells you are too close. And if they're from a distance where they're just watching and nothing happens, great. Or if they're from a distance where they can see things and get positive, treats or play, that's great. So that's really what we mean by like responsible, efficient socialization. And puppies, we usually say this critical socialization period is arguably like 3 weeks to about like 14 weeks old. And that's when their brain is most malleable and most susceptible to this learning and emotional learning. But that also coincides with when vets are like, hey, this puppy's not fully vaccinated, they can't leave the house. So we have this kind of like almost like this conflict between what vets are saying and what trainers or behaviorists would be saying, of wanting a dog to have positive exposure at this really critical age, but not wanting to expose them to a lot of illnesses, especially parvo, when their immune system is not fully like supported. And parvo can kill dogs, so it's a legit concern. But there's got to be a medium ground of how do we help them adapt to our environment while also keeping them as physically safe as possible. So one way we can do that is through if you get like a soft-sided crate and put your puppy in the crate, as long as they're comfortable with that. If not, first start off with helping them feel comfortable in a soft-sided crate. And maybe we give them like a stuffed Kong or a long-lasting, like high-value chew in there, or maybe we are strategically putting some treats in there, or just setting up the distance where they are alerted to what's going on around them, but they feel comfortable and relaxed, and they're just watching. So that's one way where they're not exposed to potential like illnesses or viruses that could kill them, but also are still getting like exposure in that really critical window to the life that they're going to be expected to adapt in. And another thing to consider as well is thinking of introducing novel objects. So this could be just like opening up an umbrella, for example, or maybe like the trash bag sound, or trucks, or just like funky things that don't really come up in the natural environment, and getting them used to that. Maybe it's seeing people with sunglasses and hats, people of different ages, different races. All of this actually does play a role in how dogs perceive those things, or people or experiences as adults. So just getting kind of curious about that and playing around with where can I bring them where they can just kind of be exposed safely to these different types of experiences, and having it be a net positive for the puppy. You don't have to overdo it. I recommend keeping these sessions like about 20 minutes long, as puppies usually get very tired and need some naps. And if you overdo it, you tend to see them kind of emotionally shut down, where they might get like really restless or overexcited or mouthy, or people might say they throw these temper tantrums. We have to remember we're dealing with babies. They can't emotionally regulate themselves yet. So keep it short and sweet. And thinking about in the home, can you have them practice confidence of walking on different textures, things like wet grass, that might be outside, but wet grass, or hardwood floor versus carpet versus, I don't know, just anything kind of different feeling on their paws can be helpful. Being touched in different areas, so getting them prepped for vet medical handling. Again, something that wouldn't happen in the wild. So if you think back to our street dog friends, that would be very threatening. If a person or another animal was like going through their ears, lifting up their mouth, squeezing their paws, that would all put them at risk for harm. So we have to remember that vet and medical handling is strange to the natural world. So if that's something that your dog is going to need to do, which for most of us it is, thinking about slow positive experiences from a young age to get them used to that type of thing. Same with grooming, especially for dogs with coats that require it, like our doodles and poodles or any long-haired breed dog is going to have to get used to that. Okay. And then, so after that critical socialization period ends, does that mean socialization is over and you're doomed? No, it just means that this critical time where their brain is most malleable has shifted. So instead of being like really malleable of wet clay, it's kind of like the next process where you can still shape and mold it, but it's requires a little more patience and strategy to do so. And I would argue some people argue there's like a second socialization window in dogs that goes through adolescence. I would say just if you continue with this kind of process you've already been doing of slow exposure with positive experiences to the world that they're going to be in and experiences they're likely to have, you'll be on the right path. So even through as your puppy gets older and through adolescence and into adulthood, thinking about trying to make experiences a net positive emotionally and getting them used to things that are going to be required of them. And so if you adopt a dog or let's say you get a dog that was rehomed and you weren't there for those early life experiences, that also doesn't mean you're doomed. It just means, again, that your dog might have or just be predisposed to certain behaviors or feelings that had nothing to do with you. And that's your starting point. And now moving forward, we can be strategic about how we support them through living in this new human world and going about things again from distances they can handle, trying to create net positives and just trying to help them perceive the world to actually not be scary. So what's really important then is making sure to the best of your ability that negative experiences aren't happening over and over and over again to them. Sometimes no matter what we do, it happens, especially if your dog's interacting with other dogs. Odds are they're going to have a negative experience with another dog and potentially fear other dogs after that. We can step in with training to help support and kind of flip that narrative and help them have positive experiences with other dogs. But again, really thinking about how do we just help them either feel like these things are neutral or are not scary. And I think the best way to do that is through strategic distance as well. But it can be hard in very urban environments, getting a distance that is controllable. Anyone who's lived in a city, you can know, oh my gosh, it's like there are just triggers and overstimulation like everywhere, around every corner. It's hard to really it's hard to create an environment that is controllable. So in those cases, sometimes it's worth it to maybe have your dog go in the car and you drive to a park where you can more strategically be aware and set up those distances from things, versus just being like, okay, let's dive right into the neighborhood. And for those more tricky cases, that's where getting a trainer or behavior consultant is really helpful because there's a lot of nuance to it. There are things we can do. There's the whole training plans that we can dive into. And really all that type of training or behavior modification is really socialization as they're adults, of trying to help them perceive the world that they're in as safe. So now we're going to tie this into people. So from a young age, we're taught consciously or unconsciously whether or not it's safe to express how we feel, to have needs, or whether or not the environment or those people around us are safe. So even if, let's say, like a baby is crying and doesn't have their need met, they're already learning from a young age through that attachment or lack thereof, whether or not it's safe to express themselves, whether or not they can trust others in the world around them. And they've done this study even on rats, actually, of showing how the effects of if a mother rat was nurturing or not to their babies, what the effect it had on that rat and the way that it mothered its babies. And it was passed down. So there's a whole lineage of rats that were not nurtured from a young age, where the mother did not groom them or really pay attention to their needs and didn't really know how to do that because they weren't taught that or never experienced that themselves, compared to the rats that were raised in that way. And there was a clear difference in how they were teaching their young. And then the study showed that the rats that were nurtured were displaying more signs of emotional regulation, stress tolerance, and showed less signs of aggression, and were able to learn quicker compared to the rats that were not nurtured. They ended up having much higher rates of stress and distress from new experiences, and had kind of things that stunted their learning and were more prone to aggressive behaviors. So, not only do our early life experiences that we don't even remember shape and influence the way we perceive the world and adapt to it, it also shapes how we treat the next generation, whether or not we're conscious of it. So, one might argue that our critical socialization period as humans could be maybe these like early experiences and attachment that we have with our parents. And that doesn't say that our learning ends once we're no longer babies, right? And same with puppies. Learning happens throughout life. Adults learn, we're learning every day. It's just that the most critical, malleable time in the brain has already started, and then it just becomes a little bit less malleable over time, or maybe these jumps in development kind of a lot less malleable. And that's kind of why there is that saying that this is going to sound bad, but like old people are stubborn. It's because their neuroplasticity is hardened. It's less likely the older you get. It becomes more and more solidified. And those habits and patterns more and more solidified. Compared to when you're younger, it's much more adaptable and malleable. But that doesn't mean it's set in stone. You can change and rewire those things. And elderly or older people still have neuroplasticity. It just, again, looks a little bit different. And so if we're thinking about this term socialization, we might have had that critical window already before we're even conscious of it. And we still have these experiences that shape us as we develop into older kids and adolescents. So these developmental stages, a lot of times, these parenting groups and classes will really encourage kids to crawl or use their voice in certain ways to essentially develop these skills that they'll need as adults. If you haven't been exposed to kids, you might not know that this is a thing, but there's a lot of, in this day and age, a lot of encouragement of like having them crawl, touch things with their hands. At certain ages, they're putting everything in their mouth to try and really just understand the world and grow these skills and behaviors that they'll need to have eventually as adults. And as our kids hit a certain age, they're much more prone to like being influenced by peers, and especially as adolescents. And the same thing kind of happens with our dogs as they're in that adolescent window, which is arguably around like 4 to 6 months up until usually about 2 or 2.5 years old. They really want to just like have their own autonomy. They want to like hang out with other dogs more often than not, and kind of do the opposite of what you say. Similar with teenager kids. They much more are influenced by what is cool or what their peers are doing versus what their parents want them to do. And at least in humans, their peers aren't very emotionally regulated, or they don't have the emotional maturity to really hold space for vulnerable emotions or complexities. So even if you came from a really nurturing couple of parents and early life experiences, we can still be really influenced by what happened when we were adolescents or a little bit younger and how our peers related to us. If we said something or did something and then we're shamed about it, it can create these just hits to our attachment and to really understanding ourselves and feeling comfortable. And we might then perceive certain social experiences to be threatening or feel like we have to hide ourselves and how we show up. And if we're going to tie this into dogs, if they're just interacting with a lot of their kind of young, rambunctious peers, they might have some instances where, again, they're not super emotionally mature, where then they're like, oh gosh, now I have to protect myself from other dogs because they don't listen to my signs for space, or maybe another dog just like, I don't know, came onto them too strong. So it's a similar concept. So tying this back into people, as we are like young kids and influenced by our peers and things like that, we're learning whether or not it is safe to be vulnerable or express our real selves. And more often than not, if not in every case, we get maybe bullied or someone doesn't accept us for who we are or society doesn't. And so we learn then it's not safe to be who we really are. I have to suppress these feelings, or I can't trust those in authority, or maybe I have to perform to get affection or to get love and safety, or I have to do a certain thing, which shapes us all the way into adulthood of our beliefs of the only way I can get love is if I work for it. So we'll chase after partners who don't just freely give us love. We feel like we have to like convince them, or we get really addicted to sports and think, oh, it's because we win in a sport that makes us worthy of love and connection because that's the only way we got it from our parents. Or we learn that expressing ourselves is not safe because it might then make someone else feel emotionally unstable, which then they could act out on it. So all of these things we learned from a really early life experiences and throughout adolescence that shape us into adulthood that we unconsciously pass on to our own children until we become aware of these patterns and reparent ourselves. And that's something that I think is really fascinating and important to dive into. Anyone who's listening that wants to go further into this work, I recommend looking into therapists that practice internal family systems, and or anyone trying to process and work through trauma, going through or looking into EMDR to be really helpful at rewiring the brain. There's even self-hypnosis work you can do that can help, again, reshape these subconscious beliefs we might not even be aware of that are influencing how we show up today and what we pass on to our kids. So a slightly different topic than with dogs, but it's this concept of that socialization and early life experiences shaping how we show up in the world and how we relate to others. So I think we can all relate to one another because we've all been through tough moments where we didn't get the support we needed to feel safe in a new experience. And it's why I train in the way that I do, and why I really look at dog training as really just personal growth in disguise. So when we slow down and really look at who we are, what's shaped us this way, and we're aware of all the potential unconscious things that likely happened to us before we even really had a memory of it, it helps us understand how that same process can impact our dogs. And so when we get them as puppies or when we bring them into our lives, I think understanding this concept can help us empathize with them more and support them better, as opposed to looking at it as they're doing this because they're bad or they're trying to dominate us or they're trying to be the alpha. It's really looking at it big picture and zooming out and getting rid of that language that I think stunts empathy and the ability to empathize. Whether you're raising a puppy or helping an adult dog settle into a new chapter, I hope this episode gave you some clarity and encouragement. If you want to go deeper, I just published a full blog post on this called What Socialization Really Means for Puppies. I'll insert a link in the show notes. And if this episode resonated with you, share it with a fellow dog parent or leave a review to help the podcast reach more people who care about raising dogs with compassion and clarity. All right, until next time.